Hello and welcome to The Gist. I'm your host, Chris Vetrano, here every week to break down all the things that are happening in pop culture and interviewing the people that make it pop. Today, I've got a pop culture OG joining the podcast. He was a top 10 finalist on the very first season of American Idol, who went on to release multiple albums of sultry dance music that can be heard in clubs around the world. And he starred in the hilarious Eating Out film franchise. Now, after a 12-year hiatus from music, he's back with a hot new single. Take a Bow is available everywhere you listen to music now. And that can only mean that my guest today is the one, the only Jim Verraros.
Hi,
hey,
Chris.
Jim.
How are you? Thanks for having me.
Of course. I am so excited to have you because people that listen to the podcast, they know I'm an American Idol fan, Kelly Clarkson stan.
Same.
I can't remember. I think like it was my sophomore or junior year of high school when American Idol came out, and I became obsessed with it. And you were such a big part of it. I had your TV guide where you were on the cover.
Yeah.
So, very excited to have you and talk to you about it today. I know you've got your new single, but before we get there, I want to take it back 21 years, which is when we first got introduced to you on Idol. Tell me how that kind of came to be for you.
It was so, spur of the moment. I had a good friend of mine who had called me on the phone. She said, I'm driving in my car. I'm hearing this commercial for this show, and you could win a record deal. And I was like, okay, that sounds fun, and I was at Columbia College in Chicago, just studying, musical theater and vocal performance. So I wasn't really like headed down the pop star route. I really loved theater. And, being on stage was really sort of my first love. So I went. It was at the Congress Plaza Hotel, and I walked in, and there was nobody there. And so I'm looking for someone to audition for, and someone with a head mic kind of walked up, and she was like, oh, just have a seat. We're just waiting for more people to show up. And I was like, okay.
Oh, wow.
So again, this was like before there are like stadiums now of like people auditioning. You have to go through like 19 rounds just to like see a human being. So I waited until 3 or 4 more people kind of showed up, and then they took us in this tiny little banquet room with a old school camcorder that looked like you could be doing softcore porn in the room. So I thought, what am I getting myself into? And then you stepped up to this line, which is just duct tape on the floor. And they had you sing, a couple of bars of whatever you wanted. I think I sang like a jazzier like song, just because I didn't want to do something super pop and super common. I just wanted to be a little different. And they're like, great, can you sing something pop? And I was like, great, sure. And then they bring you out, and, someone tries to like pull some, kind of information about you and your life. And, I told them my parents were deaf, and they took that, and that was
ran with it. Yeah.
That was my story, and I think looking back, it served a purpose. And I think, it allowed, I think, America to sort of connect with me on that, in that way. But I just didn't want it to be all about, because that's just my family. That's my family. That's my life. That's nothing, new to me.
Right. And then after that, you did the audition in front of the actual judges where you actually like signed the...
Well, Paula asked me to. And I was
okay.
What am I going to say? No. So I was just not prepared. I didn't like fully flesh out, the audition to be America's Next Sign Language interpreter. I just was not prepared for that. So it was a little sloppy, honestly. But, I think it did the job for the time,
Yeah. Well, and it, like you said, it gave you kind of like your story arc. It gave you something that set you apart. And I think that ended up working in your favor because, that was at the time, no one really knew what it was.
Right.
And you got to have something that people could remember you for, which is always good.
Totally. And you can't control, what's on the cutting room floor. And, all you can do is portray your best self and, hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, being in like musical theater and all of that at the time, you weren't familiar with Pop Idol or the show in the UK and like didn't know that that's kind of what they were trying here.
Not until I, sort of auditioned was I like, where did this come from? And then I started to look at like Will Young and looked up his auditions, and I was like, who's Simon Cowell? This really mean British guy? Like, why? And but then for me, it was Paula Abdul that was the sell. I was like, oh my God, love her.
Mm-hmm.
And to have the chance just to meet her. I think I was more excited about just like meeting her than like auditioning for the show.
Yeah.
And she's everything that you could ever want and hope her to be. Like she's like even better than that. So that was really exciting. That was the sell. And then I ended up, going to Hollywood, which is really
Yeah.
Pasadena, which is kind of a letdown. But, again, like I want to stress that the landscape of season one was just so different. I think that they were trying to figure things out as we went. Rules were changed. I think that, they were just like, how do we make this work? And, I think being a part of that very first season is very different than, seasons after, because you didn't expect anything. There was no, expectation of a tour, an album, merch, right? Like you didn't really know what was going to happen. And so once you made top 10, I think you were sort of like a part of all these great opportunities. And, I was like a Ford Focus commercial. Great. And you just ran with it,
Yeah. And like the tour and stuff like that, that wasn't initially part of the contract, right? Because they didn't know that it was going to become this like major, huge pop culture moment.
I mean, that was huge. I was like, we're going on tour. Like that was just a total, surprise. And also probably the best part of, I think, the entire experience. There's no judges, and these people who've sort of grown with you throughout the last couple of months of the show, you're sort of like given this fan base. And in any other, platform, it takes years to build that. And so that was what I was most grateful for, is that, you're, as an artist, you're doing something different every week, right? So it's Motown or pop or rock, right? And so you're trying to do these different genres of music, also trying to figure out your identity as an artist and where you fit in, to music. But you get on tour and these people have connected with you. They're invested in you. They want to know what's coming. And so it's an incredible chance to, put out music as quick as you can to feed, that hunger for it.
Yeah. And I mean, talking about how it became such a kind of pop culture phenomenon, you guys went on tour together, but also, and as we said, the show has changed so much and evolved so much. But in that first and second season, you guys also had the house that you guys stayed in.
Yeah.
And so you guys actually kind of got to know each other, I think, better than, you don't see the camaraderie as much on the like more recent seasons. And I don't watch like anymore, but I mean, even in the later seasons of Idol, you didn't feel this kind of camaraderie the way that you guys did. I mean, you guys were so sad when people were voted off, and there was just like, you could tell there were like friendships that were really formed in that experience.
It's so true. And it's funny that you mentioned the house, only because I think that they introduced that to make it almost be like, could this also be like the real world as well? And I don't think it really like played out that way, but it was a cool opportunity. And I think that the biggest thing for all of us is that I don't really remember any of us being like super competitive with each other. I think it was very just like, I'm just going to do the best I can for myself. It wasn't like, oh, I need to like, beat Kelly or beat Tamira. It was never like that. It was just very like, whoever wins, wins, and we're happy for whoever. And, that's how at least I felt the whole time. But again, this wasn't sort of my dream. It wasn't, I was trying to be a pop star. I just wanted to be an actor really more than anything after that. So it was a really kind, supportive, we were just rooting for everyone.
Yeah, it felt that way. I mean, it felt really authentic in that kind of way. And I know that you on social and stuff, you're keeping up with some of the folks still from that season. Do you feel like you still have some of those like friendships that you created there? Yeah,
for sure. I mean, Christina, she came to my wedding, in 2021. She actually referred me to my corporate job that I have now. So she and I have been close for like the last 20 plus years.
Wow.
With Kelly, it's been a couple of years since I've seen her in person, but my husband, Sean, and I went to see her Vegas residency end of July. So I haven't seen her in a couple of years. I had sent her some footage for her talk show, sort of like as a Where Are They Now update. It was like me, Tamira, and Christina. But Ryan Starr and I, we still talk. RJ and I still talk. EJ and I still talk. We're very close. I like to just keep that tight, and it takes work. I think I organized during the pandemic a little reunion like via Zoom, and I pretty much got everyone except Kelly and Nikki. And then Justin, after that, on his podcast, ended up getting like the 9 of us together too. So
Amazing.
Yeah, it's fun. They're all incredible people. And, to have a career 20 years, after, like Justin doing this incredible Broadway show, and obviously Kelly's success is like monumental.
Hmm.
It's a huge deal. If you can pay the bills,
Yeah.
and have a career in it 20 years later, I mean, that's saying something. So
Yeah. And, it's so, you guys were all so memorable. I mean, everyone that, like I said, you were on the TV Guide, and, it was such a pop culture phenomenon. And now, I mentioned this, I think Kimberly Locke was on the show,
love her.
and I was mentioning to her, like, Kelly Clarkson was on Watch What Happens Live, and
Yeah,
Andy Cohen had asked, like, can you name a recent Idol winner? And she couldn't.
right.
And it's like, but back in the day, like, we knew all 10 of you. Like, we
Totally.
knew all of you. We were invested. I mean, I went to the tour. I
Uh,
had
did
the
you
the
have fun?
CD.
Did you like it?
I did. It was so
Oh, good.
funny. I decked out in Idol gear and things. I was like,
I love
very,
that.
very much a stand for it all. And I even bought a bootleg DVD of, like, somebody like recorded the tour,
Oh
and
my God,
I
that's
like bought the
amazing.
DVD because I like wanted to watch it again.
I love that. I don't even
It
have a
was
bootleg copy of that DVD. I would totally want that, actually.
It's I'll have to see if I still have it. I mean, it's not good. It's not good quality. I mean, I bought it on eBay probably for like way too much money,
Amazing.
and they like said it was professionally filmed, and then
Of
of
course it
course I
was.
got it, and
Yeah.
it was like somebody on their camera phone,
Breathing
which
heavy and like shaking the whole time. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But it was, I mean, it was so different. And now it's like, the shows really are focused on the judges and the coaches, or whatever format the show is. That's really more of what is like the ratings appeal. And it's
Right.
less about the talent.
Yeah.
And you guys at the time, it was like, you guys were actually pushing out real, like, talented people that could have careers from it. And I mean, we saw that with so many of the contestants. And then you released your debut album,
Yeah.
Rollercoaster.
Mhm.
So you said, I wasn't interested in really becoming a pop star,
Yeah.
but then Rollercoaster happened, and I mean, you were a pop star.
I wouldn't go that far, but I had this, someone reached out to me, after the show. And I think in my personal experience, I think going through that process and being, openly gay with people on the show, I didn't really say anything publicly just because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really think about it until,
Yeah.
both Out and The Advocate, while I was on tour, wanted the exclusive to my story. So I think I just kind of took a beating, I think publicly, just from, I just wasn't as good, in terms of vocals, like, in terms of like just comparatively speaking to everyone else. And I knew that, like, I'm not stupid. But I just thought, I think I just sort of listened to that. And I was just like, you know what, you're not a singer. You're an actor. So, go that route. And then I got this email from Gabe Lopez, who produced my first two records.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know who he was. And, he had sent me a few songs that he had produced and worked on. I thought, oh, these sound really good. And he was like, I want to work with you. Like, I think you have a really nice tone, and I think we could, build something. And I thought, okay, I'm open to someone that believes in me. Right. And he was responsible for everything. He was like, I remember I was like, yeah, I really think I should do like a John Mayer vibe. He's like, no, we're not doing a John Mayer vibe. And I was like, okay. And then he really pulled out, things that I didn't think I had. And, it's different when you're outside of like a television show where people are watching you. And remember, this was before social media. We had no
Mm-hmm.
social media back then. We had message boards, literally,
Right.
And handwritten mail that I got. So, I was bullied for sure. I had gotten horrible, messages like, a faggot will never win American Idol. And, it was pretty scathing. And I was like, you don't even know me. Like, you don't even,
Yeah.
we've never even met. Like, and I feel like if you knew me, you would actually like me, but again, it's like when you put yourself out there, that's what you're subjected to.
And that wasn't really represented on TV at the time either. I mean, there were like few things here and there, like Queer as Folk, I think probably was on,
Yeah.
and Will and Grace and things like that. But like,
But from a music point of view,
yeah,
there was no male pop American out anything,
Yeah.
zero. So, no one gives you, I didn't have agents or managers after Idol shaping my career after someone, because there was no someone else, like Troye Sivan, who is amazing. Love
Mm-hmm.
him. He came out 10 years after on the scene that I came out. So
Mm-hmm.
just to put things into perspective, shows like, Glamorous on Netflix with Kim Cattrall, and even shows like The Idol with Troye Sivan, who acted in that show too. Right. The popularity of Schitt's Creek and all of those things, and Vincent and some other idols that are doing really well. David Archuleta, Adam Lambert, David Hernandez, Michaela Gordon, all these great talents from Idol. It was a different time. So I just feel like in a lot of ways, and I've said this in a couple of interviews, if my career had just shifted like 5-10 years later, I would have had a better shot, I think, or at least have had people in my corner say, okay, we know what to do with you. Here's what we're going to model you after. And the Eating Out movies, right, that came out in the early 2000s, they're not like, Oscar worthy, obviously, but they don't have to be. They're moments of representation, which we just didn't have. And so, yes, they were quirky and fun and campy, and and I loved being a part of that, because in a way, I almost was looking at myself years before not having that, and I thought, well, this is going to do something for queer youth, before me. So, I just think it's defining success differently, as it works for you,
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting. I do want to like touch on that kind of coming out story, because obviously publicly you came out during the tour, but were you out during the show?
Yeah.
And so the other contestants, they knew, your families knew, there was no closeted Jim at that point.
No. Well, so I came out, before Idol, I came out at 18 to my mother and my sister. My sister's 2 years younger than me. And I just had my mom wait until I told my dad. My dad and I had a very different relationship. He was born in Greece, hard of hearing, came to the US when he was 3. He was subjected to an immense amount of abuse growing up by his father, who also was abused by his father. It was just very generational. Mm-hmm. And I think when you are raised in that way, there is this ideal of this strong, masculine Greek son who's going to carry on the tradition of the Verraros, name. Mm-hmm. And I think as I got into my teens and I didn't really play sports, I was a gymnast, I was in theater, I just did different things. I think he knew I was different, and I wasn't going to be that sort of idyllic, vision of what his son was going to be. Mm-hmm. And, we weren't very close. He was very blue collar, worked all the time, was never really home, didn't take us on vacations. My mom was very much the both role for a long time, until now. Now my dad and I are like inseparable, like we're very close. But when you come from that world, it's hard to understand what gay means, what it looks like, because he wasn't exposed to that growing up. So I had to almost teach him through 2 marriages. I'm, this is what a relationship looks like. It's actually very natural. It's very normal. We cook dinner, we go to the movie, right? It's just normal. And so I think once my dad saw that, I think he was more afraid of how society would perceive me as being gay.
Sure.
But I had my mom hold on to this for a year. I said, I'm not ready to tell dad yet. So once The Advocate and Out called me on tour, I had to tell my dad. So, because I couldn't come out without, I didn't want my dad to like read about it, let alone like find out about it. So, it was the last stop on tour. We were in Seattle and my parents flew out for it from Chicago. And, I was staying at the W, and I was feeling very fancy. I was like, I'm going to buy them dinner. I'm going to make them feel good. And then I'm going to break the ice to my dad. And, he reacted fine, I think as well as, to be expected. But then I moved to LA right after tour. Like I didn't even come home. So I didn't really deal with how he was dealing with it when I had gone. And so my sister, she was like, Dad's not doing well, and he does not understand. And so she really kind of absorbed a lot of that while I was in LA. So, but he came around, and he is the most supportive, loving, we're just so much more close like now, I think, than we've ever been, but it took a minute,
Yeah. Well, and perhaps the show maybe helped sort of smooth some of that, because you were saying you were getting this, like, I mean, I hate to call it fan mail, because it wasn't, it was, what is now Facebook and the trash and garbage that people can just say whatever they want.
Yeah.
And at the time they were writing handwritten letters and stuff. And I have to imagine that like he probably saw some of that. There must have been some kind of I mean, and I can't remember, like I remember as a viewer and a closeted kid myself in high
Yeah,
school who was bullied
yeah,
and
me
felt
too.
like I can't be myself because if I show any part of me,
Totally.
it will be ridiculed or, or worse. And, I saw you on national television and on, the cover of magazines and things. And I remember feeling like, well, he's doing it. And
Mm,
like maybe there is a spot for me in the world that I
thank
could
you for
like
saying that. That
be
means
that way. But it's interesting to like think back or find out later that you weren't really ever out at that point. I just knew, I guess, and instinctively. And I feel like maybe your dad or your parents like probably had some of that going on as well, where maybe they kind of knew, but once you said it, it maybe even gave him a little bit of relief knowing that like this is what that different thing that I was or feeling was.
yeah, for sure. No, I think that's very true. And I think also they were also very excited that I was bringing such awareness to the deaf community as well. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
like, I'll never forget when we toured, we performed in Chicago here at the Allstate Arena, which is a more suburban venue. So United Center is downtown Chicago, kind of like where all the big ones go. But if you're like just a little bit smaller, you would come to um, the other venue, Allstate Arena. And I remember people like literally like doing like the I love you like in the crowd like for me because they knew it was my hometown. And I think
Mm-hmm.
my parents like seeing this was just like Jim showed like really brought a light to the deaf community because everyone kind of thinks that the deaf community doesn't really have a relationship with music, and that's not true. I think that
Yeah.
they feel it in a different way because they have to through tempo, bass,
Mm-hmm.
beats. Like that's how you can feel the music. And so I would, tell people like my mom or my dad, if I would send my dad songs or he'd listen to my album, he'd pull up the lyrics and like read it and like crank up the bass and just try and
Mm-hmm.
make out as much as he could. So it's just different. There's a
Yeah.
relationship there. It's just so I think my parents were also very happy that I was very open about my childhood growing up, being fluent in sign, and being their interpreter in a lot of challenging situations at a young age. So
Yeah.
they also were very grateful too.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And you mentioned that I recently just saw the movie Coda. I was
Yeah,
late to the
oh,
game on it,
love it.
but it was like, I mean, I don't want to like tear up and cry right
I
now,
know.
but like the
That's my
scene
life.
where you're realizing that like they're sitting in the audience, the parents, and they like can't hear their daughter on stage. And
Hmm.
it was like, and then to hear the dad's like sort of interpretation of like, I want to feel it differently.
Hmm.
So sing close to me and like do
Yeah.
these things. And
Oh yeah.
so it just brought that memory up when you were talking about that. Cause that's, it's something that like I have such a connection to music and I've been such a music fan my entire life. And it has shaped a lot of who I am. And I can't imagine like having never heard it. And
Yeah.
that's something that, I just, people don't think of. And so you're right. You did touch people in a way in that, because I think that was people realizing like you're doing this amazing thing on stage and you've got parents in the crowd who can't
We'll never
hear your
know.
voice. Yeah.
Which is also good because then my mom thinks I'm as good as Mariah. So I'm like, well, maybe that's a good thing, But I think like for me, just growing up as a kid, like I would sing along with like everything, and I would try to harmonize with like everyone on the radio, right? And my mom would just look at me while she was driving, and she'd keep like putting her hand on
Mm-hmm.
my throat, or I would be performing in high school, and we'd have an interpreter for my mom, in the
Mm-hmm.
crowd in the audience, and people would like leave and they would go up to her and they'd be like, your son was just amazing. And my mom's like, really? And because she doesn't, I mean, how do you know, but she kept getting these compliments, for my performances. And my mom was like, all right, like, I guess he's okay.
Yeah.
So it's hard because your parents, if they know you've got a talent, particularly as it's musically related, how do you know to push that or encourage that or feed
Yeah.
that? You know what I mean? So I was sort of like, guess I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's, I wonder too if, because, you have obviously recorded music, but you've said a couple of times, like, I really just wanted to be an actor. Do you
Yeah.
feel like that played a part in that at all? Like, because my parents and the way that I grew up, they could never experience the music side of things, like, but
Mm.
it's more accessible for them in an acting sort of way. Do you feel like that draws you to that in any way?
I don't think that there's a direct correlation, but I guess now that I think about it, when an interpreter is signing, to a deaf person, and it's just in a conversation or it's just an exchange, you can look at someone's facial expressions and sort of at least get it from that perspective. But when you're singing, it's a lot harder to communicate that. I just feel like I'm just stronger in that area. When we shot Eating Out, 2 movies, we shot those in 10 days. I had maybe 1 or 2 takes, for everything, just because we were on a time frame, and
Right.
it was just a low budget, independent, film. I just felt very in my element. It felt very easy for me. I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed the process. I loved hearing the criticism and the direction and wanting to, okay, second take, I'll nail it. I just really felt at home, and it was very, I don't know. I just loved it. And then my first stage production, I was 7, and I did The Music Man at the local high school that I would have attended years later, because my choir teacher at 7 was like, you need to be on stage. And I was like, okay, and I think there's a rush that you get from like a very raw element, like a Broadway stage or, an off-Broadway stage. I mean, theater will give you that high because it's immediate, and it's, you feed off of an audience, just like a performance, too. So I think that was just what I thought I should be doing,
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about that, the Eating Out years. Obviously then you became kind of this like cultural out gay icon. And you were able to kind of really be I think I read like there wasn't another out contestant on American Idol for like another 3 years or something like that after you. And I know since even some of your fellow contestants have come out, but it really was still very taboo, and you became sort of the quote unquote poster child for the gay guy from American Idol. And like, did that resonate to you, and did that feel like you had kind of paved a path, or was that something that you felt like you wanted to strip away from that kind of title?
I think I just sort of embraced it. I didn't really think, when you're so young, Chris, it's like you just like roll with it. You almost like don't think, you just do. And all I knew is that I couldn't not be out publicly, because I wasn't going to do this unless I was going to be true to myself. You hear all these things about people like, not being true to themselves and hiding and all of that. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm not, even though I was told like so many times that I should shut my mouth because I wasn't going to have a career. And to some degree, that was probably partially right, for the time. I mean, in the early 2000s, I think it was detrimental to my career that I came out publicly, because I was so young. I was told to just be quiet about it, but I just couldn't do it. I would just rather, I was thinking at myself at 16 or 15 and like who I would have needed to see. And, that just like resonated with me. So, I felt like, in terms of just being a poster boy or the poster child, I was just happy to just be open. I was just happy to like, hey, I can act and I can do music now and go to the Abbey, in LA and like not worry about, anything. And, I hope that future idols, saw that and maybe felt a little bit safer or a little bit more welcomed, that, hey, I did it, and you're going to be fine if you do too. You know?
Yeah. And I mean, and the world evolved a bit. I mean, now, as you mentioned, like Troye Sivan's and the Sam Smiths, and there's all kind of Kim Petras and all of these like icons now, but like it was such a different time. And so we're really talking about that. And I think, for people listening, I think like it might feel a little like, well, what did Jim really do? And like, he was a poster child of something that like now isn't as taboo, but it was truly taboo then.
It really
that like there wasn't people doing that. And I think, did you know about like the other contestants from your season? Did you also know, were they out like in a closed door setting and they chose not to be out publicly, or were they still sort of closeted?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, the story with RJ Helton, obviously from my season, just a tremendous talent. Him and I very much bonded like throughout the entire, first season. Him and I were, I mean, he wasn't he wasn't out publicly. He was also a Christian singer, and
Right.
so he put out a Christian record. And I think that is clearly going to be a hindrance
Right.
in that world. And so during our tour and all of that, like RJ and I were close.
Yeah.
And I think when you go through something like that and you're young, that's going to happen. You're going to find attraction. You're going to find someone that makes you feel like less alone, someone that you trust. And so obviously I was very attracted to RJ, and it just sort of happened that we, you know, were just close.
Right.
So I would never have put that in danger. I never would have, done anything to,
Out him.
out him, affect his career in any way or
Right.
chances. But yes, he definitely would have been one of those people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think because, I remember, I think it wasn't really until maybe kind of Adam Lambert
Yeah.
that when his season, I mean, he was deemed sort of the wild idol. And
Yeah.
I think that was like his Rolling Stone cover.
Yeah.
And it was like, he was wild. I mean, yes, he wore makeup, and yes, he kind of like,
And it's like, is that wild though? It's
right.
like you mean the gay one is what you're trying
Yeah.
to say. Yeah.
Yeah. They were just trying to rebrand gay in a
Yeah.
way.
Totally.
And then I think from then on, it became more just sort of, I'm going to be who I am on the
Totally.
show. And when we
Yeah.
started seeing a little bit more authenticity, but also I think that's when the show kind of stopped
Yeah.
caring about the artists as much
That's
and
true.
more on who was behind the judges table.
And with him too, he also had, I mean, the show had gotten even bigger by the time, Adam Lambert was on. And so there were more eyes on him. I think that there was more pressure on him. And I was rooting for him. I was like, this guy is insane. Like, he needs to win. It's like stupid if he doesn't. So, it was all, again, a different time, a different landscape. And I think we were a little bit further, in the game, but I remember him doing that performance. I think it was, I can't remember if it was like the Billboard Awards or the VMAs or something, where he like made out with,
Yeah.
a guy. And I was just like, okay, like, who cares? Like, it just doesn't, and he got so much flack for it.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you not even hear him, like his voice? Like, this guy is so talented. He can do whatever the hell he wants, as far as I'm concerned, but I'm glad that he found the strength to kind of, I think, feel really comfortable in his skin eventually, just because I think it was proof positive that like people truly loved him, and he had made such an impression on the world. And it was also like, and I'm gay, and
Right.
it's not a big deal. I'm such a fan of his, and I've never met him in person. I hope to, sometime, but he really was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And I think we all needed him at that moment,
Yeah. No, I mean, and unfortunately that performance, I think they edited out the kiss like on the later feed or something. Yeah. And, it was sort of this Janet Jackson Super Bowl moment.
Those are totally equivalent. Yeah.
It just like everything like got blown out of proportion for something that today would probably not be. I mean, it isn't. I think we see it now in performances, and
definitely,
it's very accepted. So it's, again, like this evolution, but I think our American Idol has like really, kickstarted that in a lot of ways, and the way that the music industry shifted. I even feel like I know that streaming and that all of that has come, but there was really like a focus in the early part about like, download the single and that counts as a vote. Like, that started becoming a thing where it really sort of changed the music industry in that way, where, I mean, even, I remember one of my best friends, Cassidy Pope, who was on The Voice and won, she, like, they would do the downloads and they would talk about how like her song went to #1, and everyone was like, they saw the writing on the wall. Like, well, she's selling more singles than like some of the biggest people right now. So this is something like we need to invest in, and we need to keep going down this route. And I think at the time, American Idol had kind of started that process. Like later on, they figured out sort of this like vote through the phone and through like downloading, because I'm sure they got a kickback on all of that.
I mean, they should really have artists who are in the top 5 start working on their albums then, because it's a timing thing. Because if you don't, like with Kelly, it was very fast. Like, she had her debut single, the album was like a couple months later, the timing just worked. So like, if you don't capitalize on all of that, especially when they're cranking out season after season after season, like the winner, I think for Idol, last year, there's no album out, you know, and I think if you're going to miss the mark, and if you don't, just run, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And even with Kelly, her album got delayed.
Yeah.
And it didn't come out like before the next season. And they ended up, I think, like on the second season, she
Having
ended
her
up singing
perform, I think. Yeah.
Anytime, but it wasn't even her single because they didn't know yet what they were doing. And I think she changed some, I think some of the contracts and things behind the scenes were changing because, again, the show didn't know what they had actually produced, and they didn't know they had produced and given us a Kelly Clarkson.
Literally. Yeah.
I know you're a Kelly Clarkson stan,
Yes.
and I know that you've said in other interviews you kind of felt early on in the American Idol journey that like Kelly might be our winner.
Yeah.
And that you kind of saw that through. Was that the sense behind the scenes for everybody, or was that just more like your intuition?
I think from like the producer standpoint, they all were like, it's Justin. Because Kelly wasn't even on their radar until she was like 9th or 8th. I think once they started to whittle down the 10, they were kind of like, oh, he's pretty good. You know, and I was just like, you're all idiots because like I've known this since Pasadena. Like she was on the theater with me and like she was like 5 people down and I literally had to like look down and poke my head out. I'm like, who the fuck is this girl? I'm like, send me home. Like, I'm done. I can't with this one. Like I was obsessed with her. Yeah. Like, I'm like, this girl is it. Like, she's it. But I'm also very, very like a fan of that tone, that soulful, like R&B. And I love that. And she's classically trained, obviously. So I just loved her. I was like, she had it all to me. I was like, this is it. We're done. Like, I can, you know, just send me home. But people were like, I think it was either Justin or Tamira. And I think people were very surprised that Tamira was 4th. And I think a lot of people thought it was going to be a Tamira Kelly kind of finale. And then when it did come down to Justin, it was just like, well, Justin, you know, obviously had the sex appeal and like, you know, the female voters are going to, you know, vote like crazy. But then when you did the single, like Before Your Love for a moment like this, you're like, I think it just fell more into Kelly's, you know, lane.
Wow,
so.
Yeah. I wondered though, cause I feel like Kelly, and I might be wrong on this, but, you know, I was a fan, like I said, so I take pride in some of my facts, but I feel as though Kelly never was in the bottom.
Never, not once.
So I always wondered if behind the scenes, if producers were like, okay, she literally wins every week. And they just sort of, you know, we're not doing it in any kind of order. And like, so they just never really told you. But if producers were like, well, we know, because I think Tamira's week, wasn't it? Tamira and Justin were the bottom 2. So it was like pretty shocking.
Yes, I think so.
And so it was like, oh, well, both of them were front runners to win.
Right. Yes.
So someone crazy is going home tonight.
Totally.
And it ended up being Tamira.
Right.
Who I also just, as an aside, I never got the Tamira album that I was waiting for.
Oh, you mean like the one that she didn't, the one after that she put out? You didn't like, you were like, like not that one, you mean?
Well, I felt like there was like a lot of talk that she was going to be, because I think, didn't they have the top 5 record albums or was it just the top 3?
No. So Justin had his album, Kelly, Nikki was signed, the project got dropped. So she never actually put out a full out record. Tamira put out an album. And then RJ signed with a Christian label. Christina was actually signed by 19 Management. So she was in London, like working on her project. Ryan Starr wasn't signed. AJ wasn't signed. EJ wasn't signed. And I didn't get signed until 2005. So, yeah, that's kind of, I think, how it went down.
Because I felt like, and maybe I am wrong on this, but I felt like there was like a lot of sort of drama with the Tamira project. I felt like we were hearing that she had signed and that she was going to release an album. And I know that she was obviously on Thankful with Kelly. And, and I thought, okay, we're going to get something great. And then I felt like it just sort of fell apart. And then she sort of like she did a new album that was like her debut album felt like it was her second album for some reason to me. But I always feel like there's a lost Tamira Gray album that I wish I had. I
mean, there probably is. I mean, can you imagine, like, again, this is the first season, all this stuff is riding on it. And like, you know, as a young artist who has no true, you know, I mean, Tamira and Kelly, they were doing background vocals even before Idol. So they had a lot of experience in that, but you're fighting for artistry, your first album out, you know, and you are listening to all these voices and, you know, your management, and they're saying, well, you need to do this and you need to do that. And this is what sells. And, you know, so it's hard. Like even I was lucky with signing with like a small independent label, Koch Records in New York.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, literally, I gave them a finished album. Like, it's done. You just need to put it out. And they were like, okay, great. And then it was done. So when you're on a major label, I think that there are a lot of hands in the cookie jar. And I think you've got a lot of voices that are telling you to do certain things. And you kind of have to just do it because you're bound, right? Contractually. Yeah. So, and now the landscape is so different. Like now, I mean, TikTok is introducing Billboard charts, like because they're so powerful in driving sales, for music or, artist awareness. So it's just crazy, how much it's like shifted.
Yeah. I mean, and the TikTok stuff is like, it's a bit annoying because it's like for these amazing artists, like even, massive artists. I know Maren Morris has spoken about it. I know Camila Cabello has spoken out about it. Is like, they're like, if the labels are like, well, if you don't end up charting on TikTok, then we're not going to invest. Yeah. We're not going to invest in the project anymore. And we're going to kill it. Yeah. And it's like, but it's good. And there are still other ways that people consume music that I think we're forgetting about. But, speaking of albums, I know I did remember that Christina had signed with 19 Management, but did we ever get a Christina album? Because I don't think I ever heard one.
We didn't. She still won't send me those tracks. I'm like, I want to hear them. I literally want to hear them. I mean, because she sent me this like shoot that she was doing. I can't remember where she shot it, but it was like in this desert, and she looked like unreal. I was like, okay, what's going on? But
I remember that.
I mean, she's one of the most beautiful human beings ever. I just saw her in June because we took her son to like a college sort of summer thing at University of Chicago. And so, I mean, her kids are gorgeous. Like, she's just amazing, like the best ever. But yeah, I mean, and point to be made is that we all had, I think the first 5 more so than me, because I was 9th, but even when you have that much exposure, it's still not easy to get a record deal. I worked for years. Like I moved to LA. So the show was in 2002. I got my album was in 2000. So it took me 3 years to like get a deal. And I didn't even have that exposure. And I was gay on top of it. So, back then, I worked really, really hard. I met with labels and I met with agents and managers, and they were like, we don't know what to do with you. Like, we're just like, there was no act to follow. There was like, just do prides. And I was like, okay, which was fine, and I had a top 20, Billboard, dance hit on the charts, which I was, super grateful for. But after that, it was sort of like, okay, there wasn't like placement, in TV or film. Like, there was none of that. Again, social media was just kind of starting, I think, at that point. But again, different landscape, different time. Yeah. But I did the best with what I could do at the time,
Yeah. Yeah. And now here we are 12 years after you released your last music.
Yeah.
Why? What inspired it? And I mean, I think maybe the first question is, why so long? Yeah. And then what inspired you to come back?
Why so long? Couple of reasons. One is that I think it was a timing thing. It's also a financial thing. It's not cheap to do this and to do this right. And for me, Chris, like, I don't half-ass anything. Like, if I'm going to come back, I'm going to do the shoot. I'm going to do the remixes. I'm going to do the single. I'm going to promote. Like, I'm all in, you know? So part of that, but then also I think I've been so like hearing you like say like how I've inspired other people, and it feels really good, but it's almost full circle for me because I'm very inspired by Kim Petras and, Todrick Hall, who's killing it in being independent art, independently, funded and, doing all of his projects, and other idols, Adam Lambert, and then Sam Smith and Haley Kiyoko, and all of these incredible mainstream queer and trans artists. It made me feel safe. At 40 now, I feel like maybe there's room. Like, maybe now is a good time to put some music out. And I think too, I was like, well, do I do something that's political because it's such a shit show right now with, just the anti like everything in our community, or do I do something that's just kind of fun? And because we know that shit lives there, we just can't like focus on it. Right. So if all we can do is focus on the things that make us happy and bring us joy, I then sort of, shifted and I said, all right, well, let's just do something that's kind of fun, because there's a time and a place to make an anthem for, the political, time that we're in.
Yeah.
And it's been so long. And so I think I got in my head, like, what do people want and what do they expect? And I don't want to disappoint them and blah, blah, blah. So I met this producer who I'd known through a mutual friend years ago. His name is Lave. He produced music for Mac Miller and Chance the Rapper. And he's very talented, had a darker kind of urban tone to his production, which I really loved. And I sort of told him like, hey, I'm looking to get back into it. I'm very serious about it. So let me know your time frame, how much you're going to cost, what you want from me. He's like, great, tell me who you're inspired by right now. And I said, Tove Lo. I said, Troye Sivan. I said, Dua Lipa. I said, I definitely want to do something that's a little bit darker, that hits a little harder. And he was like, cool, I'm all about it. Sent me over 3 rough kind of tracks. I picked one and he sort of fleshed it out. And then I met a songwriter named Jace Green. He's out of Oklahoma City, this very young, like 23-year-old queer songwriter. And I'm like, he's like telling me like, do you know TikTok? You need to, I was like, okay, let's not make me feel totally old. But he's like, no, you need to do like a sped up version. Then you need to do like an instrumental version. Then you need like a vocal version. And I was like, well, I never would have known that had he not, shared this with me. And he's just so talented. And I remember we would go through these songwriting sessions on FaceTime. And Jace, as young as he is also so smart. He would take notes and he would literally like write down words that I repeated constantly. And he would be like, show me this like big piece of paper. And he'd say, did you know that you said the word control 14 times in this conversation? And I was like, okay. So I knew right away that he was just the right person to work with. And so we came up with Take My Bow. And Take My Bow it's got a lot of double entendres, through it. I think one of them is, not being ready for you then, but I'm ready for you now. And I think that's very all encompassing of the time, the climate. Yep. I think where I'm at in life, just age, maturity, and I think just feeling very confident in where things are at. And then just, little things like, everyone has their sexual proclivities and attractions and fantasies and, and I think that's lyrically just me being like, tell me what you want and I will give it to you. And that's sort of the lyric meaning behind the song. So I just wanted something fun. I've got 3 remixes planned. The sort of goal is to get this to chart in the UK first. Mm-hmm. So I've got 3 remixes from all like 3 UK London-based DJs, and they're awesome. And then Tommy Sunshine. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Tommy, but he's done remixes for Kim Petras, Nicki Minaj, Harry Styles, and Katy Perry. So he's doing my US remix. So
amazing.
I'm excited. Is there like an album on the way? I don't know. I'm not going to say no. It's more like, let me dip my toe in and see where things are at. I think if anything, I would want to do a video probably to this and see where that goes. It's really expensive to do independently.
Oh, yeah.
Even with connections and hookups and, shooting it on something very, very, doing a very minimal video, it's still expensive. And totally. But the beauty behind doing it independently is you own it. It's yours. And so rather than be tied to a label and, $500,000, in the can, and that's if they even think your project is worthy of investing in. Right. It's like, I'd rather just own it outright, and have complete control. So, yeah.
And I think, and there's the word control again.
I know. God, so weird.
The interesting thing too, and I wonder, I probably know that this is the case, but a lot of the people that have come off of Idol that have had like kind of a one album and done sort of situation is a lot of like what you just kind of described is they didn't own it. They didn't control it. They, did it because they got this deal coming off of the show, but then what didn't really set them up to sort of figure out what was next beyond that. And I think that's probably why, we don't see, some of the folks that we named that we didn't get long careers out of, even though there was the talent there. It was like that was there and they didn't have probably the right tools at the time and certainly not now. But now is I mean, as much as I just said, I sort of can't stand TikTok, it does give people more freedom. It
Yeah.
gives, there's social media, YouTube, all of the platforms that you can kind of control. I mean, even me doing this and being able to, I've had several, folks reach out about like join our podcast network and we'll help you grow it and advertising and all that stuff. And I'm like, I'm not interested. I'm doing
Right.
this for me,
Totally.
one, and
Same.
two, like at the end of the day, I want to own everything that I do. So
Totally.
I'm gonna do that. And now you can, because you can click a button and release a song or release an episode or whatever it is through the click of a button. And it's so much easier to do now than back in the day when you first were getting started.
I almost wish that Idol had like a built-in let us help you after you leave the show, because I mean, it would have been nice to have some management guidance, or at least, hey, if you make the top 10, we're going to sign you so that we help you develop artistry, meet producers, work with a couple of songs. It wouldn't necessarily promise you a deal, but I think if you had that support, just so at least they took care of you for like that, because you're thrust into the spotlight, and you're everything in your mind is telling you need to be successful. And like when you're so young and you're trying to thrive and pay your bills and live in LA, we didn't make like a fraction of the money that people bought houses that were on Idol. Like we didn't have anywhere near that. So
yeah.
I wish there would have been almost like an incubator, group of like, if you make the top 10, we're going to sign you for a year. We're going to do this artist development. We're going to have you work on a demo, because then at least you would have felt a little more confident. And you would have, with the connections between, Randy and Paula and the people that they knew. And I just feel like that would have been a really nice thing, because nobody knows how to do this, man. Not even the first season. I was like, I'm from Crystal Lake, Illinois, and I'm on the cover of TV Guide at 19. And now it's like, how do I make an album? Who do I talk to? Who do I trust?
Yeah.
Who is my network? Who do I let in my life? You know what I mean? It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think like Ryan Starr is probably one of those people too, who she was like the face of that first season in the beginning.
Because
and
she's hot as hell,
hot as hell.
Yeah.
And, but also sort of thrust into this like spotlight in a very big way. And like you just said, like you go from essentially, I mean, even Kelly Clarkson talks about like, even though she was recording demos and wanted to be a singer, she, her apartment burned down, and she goes from that to all of us who no one knows. She was interviewed on the news, to now she's America's Idol.
Totally.
And this show was, in that first season, it like skyrocketed. And it was the way that, and the reason I, even said at the beginning, like an OG pop culture icon, because you think about like shows like Saved by the Bell or 90210 or things like that, and you hear about how like all of a sudden it took off.
Right.
And then it was like, these people are uber famous and overnight. And that was like really you guys in that moment, like of the top 10, it was like this overnight fame. You guys were on the tours. It was like a machine. Suddenly everyone realized what they had, and then the success only kind of grew from there of the show, became more popular. And then you've got people, like you just said, that have to potentially go back to their lives. And what is that like? And I mean, at the time, now with streaming and all of this stuff, it seems like, why didn't they have a pickup show where they followed the lives of the the top 10 post Idol, and like made it more of a reality show while the second season was running, and like continued to tell those stories or something? Because it was like, all of a sudden, some of you after the tour, it was like, where did these folks go? Like I just said, what happened to Christina? I mean, I was on the message boards, like following everyone. I had my like, I was like waiting for I was going to buy all the albums. I have, RJ's, I have all the albums that came out in one CD booklet, and I like would keep them in order of how you guys got voted off. And then, and I would like keep some open, like I would keep the spot open for Christina and like Ryan and all of the stuff. And like, but then you never got it. And I feel like it's because it's like they had to go back to the real world.
Or even like mentors, like they could have brought us back and we could have mentored, kind of like The Voice obviously does. But I think to actually have a contestant that had made it to top 10, because you can't re-audition if you make it to top 10, like that's contractually obligated. So I never would have done it anyway. But, I think if you make top 30, I think you can come back. But I would have loved to have come back, especially if there were like queer youth who were like thinking about coming out for Idol. Like, hi, I would have been like the perfect person to be like, hey, don't be afraid. You got this. Like, you will have a career, I promise you. And I just think when it comes from a fellow contestant, it just means more. Like, I've been there. I've gone through
Yeah.
this. Like, I know what it's like. Let me kind of help you. And I wish that they would have done that for us. I mean, now on Idol, they have like on-site therapists. I mean, they have like
Yeah.
coaches for every round and like vocal. We didn't have any of that. We didn't even have a live band until Kelly did like big band night, I think. And she was like, that was like the final five,
Right.
we were to track for like most of, the final 10. So, I
Well, and
just
your
think,
catalog was much smaller too.
well,
Like
that
it
too.
was,
I had like 9 songs. And they're like, memorize this and then perform it for millions of people. Great, thanks. Okay. And I was like, okay. Yeah, people don't realize that, like, the more expensive a song is to clear on national television because they're new or they're a top 40, hit. We can't afford to play that and air it on national television. So what do we have? Well, we have songs from like the 60s and the 70s, and you're limited. So of course I would have picked a better song if I could. But we were, it was like a page, and here's like, that's all you get,
Yeah. Yeah, I remember like those first few seasons, the theme weeks were always like just sort of like random genres of like
Motown.
really old songs.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
then like you could tell when the show shifted and it was like, we're going to do Celine Dion week.
totally.
And it was like, okay, well now
Yeah, they got
we've
some money.
reached, yeah,
Yeah,
we've reached the
exactly.
pinnacle.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, so we don't know but you did mention there's 3 songs, but right now it's just the one.
It's just the one.
Okay.
But again, we will see what happens. I don't want to say no, but again, I think this is just like you do this podcast and you do this, Chris, very, very well. I've missed it. I've missed, creating. And I think I've always loved the process. I've always loved like, being in the studio or writing or collaborating with a songwriter. I love that. You're making something from nothing. You have literally nothing. And then you have a song and people are listening to it and they, want to learn the words or they want to harmonize to it. And then you can, kind of manipulate it into a remix and then you breathe new life into it. And so that whole process, me thinking through the image of what I wanted to do and, the look for the photo shoot and remixes and sounds and all of that. I love that whole journey. Yeah. It's just fun. It's really fun for me. And so it's nice because there's no pressure. I'm a tech recruiter, for a great company. I love my job. And so this isn't, I don't think I'm going to, full-fledged this out, and, full time it. I just think it's more like I would regret it if I didn't do this now and just sort of see, hey, what could happen,
and maybe you will be full-timing it at some juncture.
From your lips to God's ears, Chris. Here's hoping.
I hope she's a listener. So, okay, well, awesome. Maybe a video coming.
Maybe.
And you mentioned like the artwork. So if folks haven't seen it, they need to follow you because very sexy imagery. You're putting it almost all out there.
I mean, pretty much. I mean, it might as well be at this point. But you know what? Like, who cares? It's like, it's because it's just a butt. I mean, don't freak out. Like, it's just a butt. It's not, it's nothing crazy. I just feel like I don't know. I just think people in our country tend to like be a little bit more like meek about sexuality and body. And I think we just need to love ourselves a hell of a lot more than we do. And, Amen. I'm 40. I don't want it. I might as well take it now before I, turn to shit. So
no, it's awesome. But so do tell us where we can follow you so that we can continue to follow the journey.
Yeah. So I'm super active on Instagram. My handle is just my name. So at Jim Verraros, Verraros. Take My Bow is officially out on all platforms. So please stream. Please support queer art and queer artistry. So appreciate, everyone's support thus far, but stay tuned. We've got some fun things ahead.
Awesome. And maybe TikTok at some point.
Yes, maybe TikTok at some point. Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Jim, thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Was so fun to catch up with you. I feel like I could just I
feel like you're like a friend, and I feel like we could just like chat about everything, about this for hours. So
we need like mimosas and brunch next time in front of us.
A shit show and just film that.
Yes.
your next edition is like Idols like X, like what happens after dark or something.
I love it. I'll just host it on OnlyFans.
Yes, that's perfect. Let's make some money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for all of you out there, definitely go and stream or download and buy Jim's new single. It's amazing. Like I said, it's sexy, it's hot, and it's a bop. So
Thank
you got to
you.
go check it out. And then also don't forget to rate and subscribe so that you never miss an episode of The Gist. We'll be back next week. I'm at CM Vetrano on Instagram, Threads, Twitter, and TikTok. And yeah, until next time, thanks so much for listening. Bye.